show that people want the most, like the behind the scenes, like are Matt and Craig real human beings? And maybe we are, but maybe we're not. Maybe we're just AI.
We've been accused of a lot of things. Although I'm pretty raw, man. An AI, I don't sound like an AI, especially when I have grammatical errors and
when we were at Manifest and all of our fans were coming up to us and saying, my goodness, your program is the best thing I've ever seen. And I think that happened.
Meet somebody who said that. We
were there together.
We want to say hi to Blythe.
Hi, Blythe. Thanks for watching. This episode is dedicated to you and Digital Dispatch and all the cool things you're working on. We love to see you succeed, and please continue to watch. We're going to cater this show exclusively to you today.
Well, we have a lot of development here, Matt. By the way, I think this is such an interesting time to be in freight and supply chain. It is, I mean, there's so many things going on. In fact, we enter each week with not knowing what we're going to talk about, and there's just, so much to talk about. But the big news of the day is the Supreme Court finally made a decision.
Yes, we have
a fully expected decision, but I'm going to step back and let you talk about what your analysis is. You've had the announcement for a couple of hours. Where are we at on the Supreme Court? And I'm watching Donald Trump's press conference behind us. If you see the TV flashing, and so I'm reading the transcript as we go, but I'd love for you to talk about the understanding of what the Supreme Court said, what it didn't say, and where we go from here.
Yeah, and this is the most important Supreme Court case in my lifetime, and I'm sure many of our viewers and listeners, this is the most important case in their lifetime, even if they don't know it yet. This is the case about the reciprocal tariffs that got put in place during Liberation Day last year, having initially to do with trade deficits and illegal narcotics coming to the country. It quickly became a global trade war that was instigated by the White House, utilizing this little statute called IEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, signed by Jimmy Carter, as it were. And he also signed a couple other interesting transportation-related laws. But what we saw happen today is a ruling by the Supreme Court, written primarily by Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice, and then concurrences by both Justice Gorsuch and Justice Amy Coney Barrett and others in the play, that overturned the use of IEPA making tariffs. And this is the fundamental question. Did IEPA allow the president to utilize that statute under an emergency to create a revenue generation aspect? And the answer is resoundingly no. It does not go that way. I would say we've been covering this case. You and I talked about this case previously. If you had listened to the oral arguments, I think many Americans are not surprised by what's happened here today, especially in light of how the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, with their amicus brief in this case, kind of outlined the exact concerns that Justice Roberts, Justice Gorsuch, and Justice Amy Coney Barrett kind of put forward. But then this is a big day, and it's been like 3 hours since the opinion dropped, something like that. So we're still catching up in everything that's happened.
Well, I think what he is making clear in the press conference, I think he tweeted it or put it on Truth Social, there was a White House report, is that he intends to double down on tariffs. In fact, he's making the case right now as we speak that the Supreme Court did say there are other ways. Even the dissenting opinion said, hey, Mr. President, you can, or maybe it's the primary decision that said there are other types of acts that inside that he is permitted. And one of the commentaries was that he could have just cut off trade. In fact, he's very obsessed with that fact in his press conference, is that he could have said no trade with anybody. He has the right and the power to actually cut off trade entirely, but he doesn't have the right to tax. And I think you have argued that is the entire basis of this Supreme Court case, is that Congress did not delegate the power of taxation to the president because, as I understand it, what the Supreme Court ruled is said that Congress has to be explicit of any power that they are willing to give up. Basically, their birthright was a term that I heard on, I think it was on Bloomberg, is that if they're going to give up their birthright, which is the power to set taxes, then they must be explicit to do that to another branch, obviously the executive branch in this case. And they didn't do that. And therefore, it is not in his, he doesn't have the power to do taxation.
Yeah, that was the argument the Solicitor General pushed forward, and the dissenting opinion, some of them mentioned this. So the idea is, under IEPA, the United States president could say, I'm going to ban all trade from this country. Or the president could say, I'm going to set a quota that you can only bring in X amount of things from this country. And the argument advances, well, if he could stop it entirely, couldn't he just add a tax? And the answer is absolutely not. As you've outlined, the power of the purse, the power to raise revenue is the exclusive domain of the U.S. Congress. And if they want to give that power up, if they can give that power up, they better be really explicit in the language that they use. And obviously the Supreme Court looked at it and said, that ain't what they did in this case. And this is the final case. Like there's nowhere else you get to go in this circumstance. And to talk about like banning trade from a country, you can understand that if you do that as the president, the political climate behind you, your members of Congress, whether they're in your party or outside your party, may be more willing to stop you in that emergency. There's more accountability than Congress. And that's really what this boils down to. Congress is the branch of government closest to the people. And so they have the most accountability to the people. And Trump's signature foreign policy or even domestic policy aspect, this tariffs, for today, they're gone. And now hundreds of millions, hundreds of billions of dollars may have to go back to American shippers.
Well, I think it's interesting because we have so much to unpack here. We're specifically talking about IEPA,
yes,
which is the Emergency Powers Act, which the president can, and IEPA, can you give some background, Matt, on what is IEPA, why is it important, and what is it not actually? Because we're talking specifically, the Supreme Court case is specific about IEPA.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
It does not say, and Donald Trump is very obsessed with this fact that the Supreme Court did not say he can't have tariffs. They just said he can't use IEPA to have tariffs.
That's right.
And so can we talk about what is IEPA? How did it come about? And what rights do we, he talks about he has these other provisions. He's got on Section 232. I'd love for you to unpack that for a minute.
Yeah, so to back up and explain these statutes. So before we ever had IEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, there was another act of Congress called Trading with the Enemies Act. And this had to do with the president having the power to say, if we're in an emergency, I have certain economic powers I can use. I can ban trade. I can create quotas, all of these different things. IEPA is a blunt force instrument. It is, again, from 1977, and it had never historically been used ever to raise revenue. In its 50-plus year history, no one has ever tried to use it as a revenue generation tool. And as you've outlined, other tariff statutes exist. Congress knows how to give its power to the president. They know what language they can use that's not going to be challenged in the Supreme Court. And there's other cases that have gone through with other tariff provisions. IEPA, what makes it special, why Trump used this initially, why the president used this one, was because there are no guardrails. There is no requirement to report to Congress. There is no timeline for how long the tariffs can be. There is no amount there's no the discussion of what information Congress has to know about this. It is a tool that gives you essentially unilateral authority to do any number of things. And because Trump saw this as an aspect that had not been litigated before, it appeared that there might be an avenue, a blunt force instrument that could do enormous amounts of work within the federal government. And so IEPA, again, we want presidents to have emergency powers. If there is an asteroid coming to Earth, or if there is some sort of a catastrophe, like the caldera in Yellowstone explodes, we want the president to do something before he has to ask Congress for permission. But IEPA is not like that. IEPA has to do with setting quotas or prohibiting things from coming in. And the only way to unwind it is to have essentially 2/3, a supermajority of Congress come in and say, we don't think it's an emergency anymore. So that's what IEPA really boils down to. It is an act of Congress that is exclusively for emergency situations, which really aren't reviewable by the Supreme Court. And it has these levers you can pull. One lever that is not there is the ability to raise revenue, which is the taxing power.
And he's been very proud of the fact that he's generated a ton of revenue. He's been very proud of the fact that, inflation hasn't gone hyperbolic. He's been very proud of the fact that, he believes that it's driving manufacturing. We know from the data that whether or not there's a long-term thesis for growth, there certainly was some short-term shocks last year in 25 due to the tariffs. I don't think that's disputed. In fact, prior to the election, I was supportive of Donald Trump. I thought the tariffs would be largely focused on Asia and specifically on China. and was supportive, thinking that Congress would sort of join in some of this and we wouldn't have. But I think the Liberation Day tariffs, he just went way hard on this stuff.
I mean, this is an experiment we've never seen conducted. So what you were watching, what we all watched in real time, was this amazing grab of power from the executive branch that, again, had never been done. And we saw litigation immediately in these two cases. One was Learning Resources, one was VOS Selection, both small American businesses that were importing things abroad. They, at least for VOS Selections, they won at every step of the game. And going into the Supreme Court oral arguments, I was kind of the opinion that maybe Trump's tariffs would remain in place. But after listening to the Supreme Court arguments and after reading the Chamber of Commerce's brief, it became pretty clear to me that this was ultimately not going to be a successful play. And we wouldn't want it to be. Like, let me be very clear. For my friends that love tariffs and are very conservative, you should be happy about this, because that power, the power to declare an emergency and put tariffs of any level on anything at any time for as long as you want or for as short as you want, would be in the same hands of your political adversaries. And you don't want to have your worst political nightmare with the same kind of power to unilaterally create essentially trade wars across the globe. And so I'm encouraged by what we've seen today, though we're in the heat of battle. We're in the fog of war, Craig. We have no idea what the next 2 days look like, let alone 2 months or 2 years.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I want to read something from the decision. And basically, this was a tweet that I retweeted it. But basically that Gorish and Roberts strongly suggesting that if Trump had only done what Nixon did, temporary tariffs at consistent capped rates, SCOTUS wouldn't have taken the case, is the argument that this gentleman's making. And he's posted part of the decision. And I think this is actually really interesting because anyone who has paid attention to the tariff thing, and certainly what I have argued is it's the lack of certainty, it's the whiplash, it's the crazy Liberation Day rollout. And it's very different than the original policy orientation that I certainly thought we were getting it when he was running for office, and different than he did in his first administration. I mean, he wasn't using IEPA tariffs.
That's right. This is the
first time around. He was actually using the tariffs that he is entitled to. Mm-hmm. This time he went all in on IEPA. But I want to read this because I think this is absolutely important, and it totally backs up what you have said. And this comes back. I don't have the exact passage in the agreement or in the decision, but I will read this. Basically, it says, all that I can offer is that most major decisions affecting the rights and responsibilities of American people, including the duty to pay taxes and tariffs, are funneled through the legislative process for a reason. Yes, legislating can be heard and take time, and yes, it can be tempting to bypass Congress when some pressing problem arises. But the deliberative nature of the legislative process was the whole point of its design, i.e., no kings. That's what people who don't like Donald Trump have argued, that he's tried to be a dictator or a king. It's effectively keeping him in check. That's the power of the Constitution, to keep him in check. Is it supposed to go through that? Through that process, the nation can tap the combined wisdom of the people. I'm sorry, I'm reading this, and I never was good at reading out loud.
I have that. That's the exact section that I was going to read for us as we're talking.
You are, you're more familiar reading.
What I would say,
do this for a living. So.
For everybody who has been following this case, this is actually what you were reading of initially. This is the very last part of Justice Gorsuch's concurring opinion. And Justice Gorsuch, what he was so concerned.
Opinion mean, Matt, for those that aren't scholars?
Oh yeah, so that's a great. So when Supreme Court jurisprudence, the main opinion, the one that wins, that's the majority opinion. Sometimes you don't get a majority, and so you don't call it that. You might call it but there's different things you might call it, but it's not the majority. If you agree with the outcome, but the reasoning you have to agree with the outcome is different than what the majority says, or you have your own thoughts you want to add, you have a concurring opinion. So you say, I agree with the outcome of this case, but there's something that I want to say that no one else has said yet. And then at the concurring, you have these dissenting. So the dissenting opinions, and Justice Thomas has a pretty substantial dissenting opinion. The dissenting opinions are the ones who didn't win, and they're going to give you all of their arguments about why they think the majority of the concurrence is wrong. And maybe someday when this case or another case like this goes back to the Supreme Court, they can look at that opinion and say, oh, well, here is someone else who thought the same thing, and we agree with that. So this is the actual excerpt. This is page 73 of the 170-page order. It's got the majority, the concurrences, the dissents, and this is Justice Gorsuch with this really incredible paragraph that I think every American should hear and they should read. Here's what it says. Quote, "For those who think it important for the nation to impose more tariffs, I understand that today's decision will be disappointing. All I can offer them is that most major decisions affecting the rights and responsibilities of the American people, including the duty to pay taxes and tariffs, are funneled through the legislative process for a reason. Yes, legislating can be hard and take time. And yes, it can be tempting to bypass Congress when some pressing problem arises. But the deliberative nature of the legislative process was the whole point of its design. Through that process, the nation can tap the combined wisdom of the people's elected representatives, not just that of one faction or man. There, deliberation tempers impulse and compromise hammers disagreements into workable solutions. And because laws must earn such broad support to survive the legislative process, they tend to endure, allowing ordinary people to plan their lives in ways that cannot when the rules shift from day to day. In all, the legislative process helps ensure each of us has a stake in the laws that govern us and in the nation's future. For some today, the weight of those virtues is apparent. For others, it may not seem so obvious. But if history is any guide, the tables will turn, and the day will come when those disappointed by today's results will appreciate the legislative process for the bulwark of liberty it is." I mean, that's powerful, Craig. That is powerful.
It is powerful because it is exactly been my frustration. Like if we back up to where we were before the election, this is, when he was running for office, I was largely supportive of the tariffs because I thought we were going to get a China-style, Trump one style set of tariffs where it was going to be very targeted, very strategic. And we would be one and done. We'd have a tariff structure. We'd all know what it is. And it wouldn't be this massive set of whiplash where you don't know what's next.
Exactly.
And this constant sort of stream of stream of consciousness and threats. And I remember when he came into office, the very first set of tariff threats were he was trying to land a plane. I think it was in Colombia. And it's like, oh, we have a tariff. If you don't let the planes land, then I'm going to put tariffs on you. And you're like, okay, this is a bunch of noise. But then it was Mexico and Canada, 51st state. And then it became this Liberation Day madness. I mean, for quarters, it was not, and I didn't sign up for that. I signed up for a much more targeted, very specific on China for national security and to rebuild the manufacturing base, but not this constant whiplash. And this whole decision or this opinion basically is exactly that. It's meant to prevent, in other words, the back and forth, the uncertainty. It's hard for American businesses and people when the laws are constantly changing. And what the Supreme Court has said is it is a feature, not a bug, for laws to take time.
That's right.
To be messy. They view that as a feature of the American democratic and capitalism system, not an edict. And I think China as a dictatorship can do what they want. It's at the pleasure of the power that's over there. Xi effectively can do what he wants, right? And this is not how the American system is designed. And I I think that's a really important point, because you make the case that regardless of whether you were a diehard MAGA, you got your flag, you got your tattoo, you got all of that, that if it was on the other shoe, if this was AOC in the office or Gavin Newsom in the office, and Gavin Newsom said there is a climate emergency and we need to eliminate all internal combustion engines effective immediately, we could be dealing with that kind of stuff. And that would be incredibly detrimental. Or every sport in America needs to have, you have to have trans representation at your sports.
Absolutely.
Or, like, we're going to eliminate churches. I mean, there's all these things that could happen that would be declared under emergency that effectively what this is trying to prevent.
See, this is why you and I are so closely aligned in this, because ultimately we might disagree on specific types of tariffs, but you are a father of twins. I am a father of twins. My twins are now 3 years old. They're toddlers. I live in a world where you have to assume the worst thing is going to happen. And if you think that the worst isn't going to happen, you're going to be surprised, because they find ways to destroy everything. And so if you're looking at this case and you're going, well, maybe the next political party wouldn't do it as robustly as this. Maybe it'd be not as bad. It's like, you have to assume that power stays forever. And your opponents, whoever they may be, will do things that you would not want to see happen. And so Justice Gorsuch's concurring opinion with that little caveat at the end is kind of telling the people who are the diehard MAGAs that really do want to see these tariffs. If you like tariffs, use the existing infrastructure. Do not go and use a law that has never been used this way and expect an outcome that's different than what we put out today. And I do also just kind of one thing you mentioned earlier. I don't know that the fact that this thing was so dicey, they go up, they go down, whatever. I don't know that that's what ends up killing this case. I think what kills this case is simply taking a law that has never been used this way, using it in this way, and then people realizing, oh my gosh, if you allow tariffs under IEPA, that will never go back. You'll never use any other tariff power because this one is so powerful. So we're going to have a lot of fun over the next couple of weeks. My hope, Craig, is that this encourages shippers to pull stuff forward, and then Trump can take credit for a booming transportation market. That would be wonderful.
That's absolutely the case. And I want to talk about that, but I'm reading what he is saying. So he is now saying that he had today is in the executive order of 10% across the board under Section 122, which Section 122, according to Grok, of the Trade Act of 1974, is basically grants the president temporary authority, and I want to use the word temporary, authority to impose import surcharges, i.e. tariffs, or quotas to address serious balance of payment issues or fundamental international payments problems. Now, this would have been something he could have done easily last year.
Absolutely.
I think it's interesting because there is a cap of 15%. But he is actually arguing 10%, which means, and I've talked to people that are close to the administration who actually have opinions that Donald Trump likes the court system. And despite he likes an enemy. We all know that about Donald Trump. It's in his psyche. But he likes, if he does something that the people tell him not to do something, or he finds that he made a mistake, he can save face by blaming it on the court system of, they're the ones that unraveled it.
Yeah, we didn't want this. I tried to stop it. You wouldn't let me.
They came in and decided that I couldn't. He gets to go bash them. But somebody who works very closely with the administration says he actually views the court system as a feature, not a bug, in certain cases. And so it's interesting that he's talking about 10% across the board and not 15%. Which, if he was hell bent on doing the maximum under that authority, he should do 15%. Would you not agree?
Yeah, I think it tells us the real motivation behind this. This is not necessarily about trying to generate a bunch of revenue that is paid for by American importers. What it's about is using the various statutes available to do negotiations with foreign powers, or even domestic negotiations with people in different districts or different people in different parts of the government. And to your point, yes, they were always available to do it that way. What he wanted was initially to use IEPA because It was new. It had never been done. And if he could push the envelope a little bit further, he could get something that has never been done before. And for almost a year, he had something on the books that had never, ever been done.
But
today it changes.
Well, let me point this out. And again, this is from Grok. It's X's or Twitter's AI tool. Because this stuff is coming so fast, I'm reading off of it. Historical context and use. Section 122 has never been invoked to impose tariffs as of early 2000. This is what Grok claims.
I'll have to look. I am not prepared for that.
122, not 232, which I think is 232, but 122 is why. In fact, that's why I grokked it. Because I had not heard of 122, and apparently it's not been used. It was created in the 1970s as a short-term emergency tool, short-term being a key term, narrowing the broader presidential powers to respond to economic crises without needing full congressional approval upfront or multilateral negotiations. Now, it was in 1970s, early 1970s, I think, is what it says. Is that right? That was the oil crisis was going on. There was a lot of questions about American power. But the fact that it hasn't been used, I think is actually quite interesting.
What we'll have to see. I'm looking for some stuff. I have some other numbers here. I'll pull them up when I get a second. I had not heard about this particular use of that. I have
not heard anyone, and I'm not close to the Supreme Court like you are or under the laws, but I try to track this stuff as much as possible. And it's so, because these things are largely untested, we don't know. It is interesting that you can charge up to 15%, but it's temporary in nature.
Yeah, so I have some stuff. So this section 122.
Congress can decide to extend it, but it sounds like the president can't. But the question is, can he wait a day? Can he go and say, section 122 at 151 days, it's over with. And then all of a sudden, section 122. I mean, I don't know.
So earlier this year, I was at the Transportation Lawyers Association, and we were talking specifically about this particular case, the IEPA case, and Section 122, the balance of payments, was brought in as a potential avenue. And to your point, it is this up to 15% tariff that goes on for 150 days, and it has these caveats. It says, whenever fundamental international payment problems require special import measure to restrict imports, and 1, to deal with large and serious United States balance of payments deficits, and 2, to prevent an imminent and significant depreciation of the dollar in foreign exchange markets. My feeling in this case is, even if they haven't been tested in the courts, clearly the administration was building a backup plan for if IEPA was knocked down. They were thinking about this. And what they didn't want to have is what this section 122 talks about, is a cap on what you can charge and a timeline for how long it goes. And I suspect there's also reporting requirements that have to go to Congress and say, here's how we support this. So there was always other ways for the administration to tackle these different issues. IEPA was the one that seemed to have the most latitude for the executive to do whatever they wanted. But these other tariff statutes, and again, the Congress knows how to delegate this power. When they do it, they say duty or they say tariff. So it'll be really interesting to see how this is responded to. I suspect you're not going to see litigation on 122, though maybe you do. But at least for now, we know that he's got a plan, and he always has a plan. And we'll find out how that plan kind of challenges what we think the future looks like.
Well, Section 122 came about Bretton Woods. If anybody's followed anybody of these crypto people that like Bitcoin talk about the whole moving off the gold, off of the gold reserve, and the fact that it was, we had a cash crisis as the American dollar became the global reserve currency. It actually caused problems for the U.S. dollar because it was tied to gold, and they basically Nixon did this. So there's a precedent apparently put in place because of the fact that we had this sort of cash crisis, this monetary crisis that happened in early in Nixon's tenure. And this was an act that was followed in 1974, basically to give him the right to do it. It's interesting because basically Congress viewed Nixon's approach to what he was basically doing in the Nixon shock, from what I'm reading, which was trading with the enemy of 1917.
Yeah,
Is that Nixon took it too far.
that's right.
And basically, that's why they put guardrails in place with the idea to narrow the authority of the president in tariffs, to act quickly in future payment crises without relying on vague emergency statutes, which is exactly what Donald Trump tested with IEPA.
That's right, 100%.
And it had built-in limits to prevent abuse. And so this came out in the Trade Act of 1974. It was introduced. I'm just reading this. It's just an interesting. I mean, look, I am not a congressional lawyer. I'm not. I don't spend a lot of time in the regulatory world. We obviously have to cover it. But this is like freaking dessert for you guys, right?
So yeah, to be clear, I am a lawyer. I am an adjunct law professor at Michigan State, but I'm not a trade attorney necessarily. But I will say this: your point is really well taken. The Trading with the Enemies Act was used very expansively, and so Congress came back and said, we're going to start chipping away, narrowly defining, and making very specific statutes on how we deal with international trade. Because again, the power of raising revenue and the power to declare war, those live within Congress, and they can delegate certain things, but not everything. To get 122 to put that together, they have to delegate that authority to the president, and they explicitly say this. There's no doubt in my mind that when they were talking about the tariffs before we ever had Liberation Day, this was an option they knew. This was an option they chose to not utilize because they didn't want to deal with the requirements of the caps, the time duration, and everything else. Because to your point, like it's 150 some odd days. Once that time is up, they go away. Maybe you do them again.
Maybe, but this is something that you should check into, but does the president have the right to re-extend them?
I think that they do if there's reporting to Congress. But what people kind of think about is that is just a control over the executive. And what the president was trying to look for was ways to gain this new authority and not have to have any checks and balance of it. That's why for so many people, Republican and Democrat alike, we should all be kind of celebrating what happens with this case, because now we have the acts that have already been passed. Those can be utilized in their capacity, and we'll see what happens. But my goodness, today has been a busy day.
So the last point on this is the whole purpose was to give the executive quick flexibility for genuine payments, emergencies, while imposing safeguards to preserve congressional oversight of trade policy. Again, it had never been used, partly because the shift to floating exchange rates after 1973 reduced the relevance of fixed rate payment crises. So, man, what a time
exciting,
to be
man.
alive if you're a congressional person in trade, supply chains. It's amazing. I think what we should now talk about, Matt, is the impact of the market. And I've tweeted this. I think we've talked about it, is there will be a rally in terms of freight demand, particularly international freight demand, in my opinion. If you go back through history and you look at least recent history, and you look at trade policy changes that Donald Trump, they do create a significant pull forward. Mm-hmm. Because I think everyone's worried about what could come. And look, he has 150 days. We're going to get a 10% tariff according to Trump today. He's going to try Section 232 on everything. He's already done that in heavy-duty trucks and cabinets due to national security interest or dumping, I think is the argument. And
that's right. Anti-dumping laws, absolutely.
So Section 232, but that takes like 6 months for him to get. So I think what we're going to see, if we look at the playbook, is this 10% across the board tariff, which, we already had but he was using IEPA.
Yeah, so we're getting a discount. We got to be excited for that.
With the average tariff, I think Goldman Sachs had it, the average tariff into the United States for all products is like 17%.
Okay.
Now, to be clear, the auto tariffs that were pretty taxing, the steel tariffs are not related to IEPA.
That's right.
And so auto plants are not going to have any relief in terms of raw material costs that are lowering.
There will be components, I think, that are still going to trickle down and benefit them. Because even if it's not the core, like raw materials, there's other things that get captured into what auto companies are sourcing. So there's still going to be an impact, maybe not as big, like you mentioned.
The big winners in this, it strikes me, are the retailers. It's the garments, it's the big box retailers, and the retailers overall are going to be. And I think what we're going to see is this massive surge of, okay, we know that it's 10%. You must assume that there are more tariffs coming.
Yes, you do. That's right.
And I think that threat is enough for supply chain professionals to start responding in kind that they should go out and anticipate more tariffs and not take this as an end of tariff problem, which is going to create an enormous amount of freight demand on the ocean because cargo is going to be coming in fast and furious as companies try to get ahead of any potential change in policy that is inevitably coming. If you believe if you look at the administration's track record of things that they do, this is, in my opinion, this is the most likely outcome, is that they will Section 232 product by product by product, and we will end up in a situation where 10% is the floor, and we will have much higher tariffs on individual product components.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. My feeling, and I've talked to some large shippers and some retailers in the last couple of hours, my understanding is there's two-prong approach. One is if you haven't sued the government yet, you're going to sue the government. You're going to sue the government, the Court of International Trade, to get refunds of these tariffs. Costco sued already. I believe there's over 1,000 lawsuits currently pending against the government based on these reciprocal tariffs. So we know that is an avenue that shippers and retailers are exploring. On the other side, to your point, is okay, what does the future hold? The future probably holds a different type of tariff, and it might be larger. So now is the time to pull things forward. And that might not be to have them on your shelves right now. It might be pull them forward to have them just in case, because as these tariffs continue to go down the line, they continue to percolate, we will have even more interest in seeing how the inventories move. And there is no doubt in my mind, if we are looking for a black swan event that could resurrect the transportation industry, this could very well be that moment. Freight forwarders are excited. You see them on Twitter, you see them on LinkedIn. They're all talking, hey, everybody, something really interesting has happened. We all better pay attention because in 2 weeks or 2 months, how is this country going to look? And we better have the stuff on the shelves as quick as we possibly can.
Well, I think I want to point out a couple of things. So I'm certainly bullish. I've been bullish on X. I've been bullish on LinkedIn about the state of the freight market. We are seeing some interesting developments in the Midwest and sort of the Rust Belt. Is that capacities tighten up significantly there? We're hearing, I talked to somebody who tracks the building materials business. Some of the big public building materials companies blew out their December earnings. Their order books are starting to fill up. We know that in the data that we have through Sonar, that there is tightening of capacity in the Midwest that seems to correlate heavily with the manufacturing base of our economy. What is really interesting is, since Sonar has been around since 2018, I've never seen this, where you have real tight capacity and strong demand signals in the Midwest and all the way to Texas, and not have it in the coastal cities. Like coastal cities, particularly the West Coast, has been really weak from a freight demand standpoint. And this will tip that over. It is obvious to me that what's going to happen is we've gone from this real tight demand in the Midwest and parts of the sort of center of the country, that I-35 area out to West Texas is where we're seeing it. You see a little bit of tightness, but not super tightness in the Southeast. And almost the West Coast is kind of a dead man's land right now. And I think what's going to happen, there's some seasonality that Chinese New Year, but even coming into it, I think what's going to happen is we're going to see a massive surge of demand for international imports coming into Southern California because inventories are already pretty low. So this isn't like just about pull forward. There is a huge element of that, but also inventories are pretty low. And I think what we're going to see is a real strong surge of demand. And if you're a trucker, this is exactly what you want.
Absolutely.
You have a demand catalyst. And because in my opinion, we're going to get a continuing stream of uncertainty that this administration is going to continue to throw out. I think that's going to mean that a lot of importers are going to start taking a high level of precaution of having more inventory than they normally would have, just to prevent any kind of tariff uncertainty that may be coming.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. We have seen the freight markets kind of stall for a long time. And part of that's driven, like you said, about just the general freight economy and other pieces that are happening. But this moment becomes the catalyst. There are so many fleets that have extended the lifespan of their trucks and trailers because they're afraid to buy new, and they're not going to buy new until they get more revenue coming through and they start feeling the excitement of a market that's shifting. And you saw all these major retailers and shippers sue the federal government for anticipatory knockdown of IEPA. Now it's gone. So all of those things that slowed us down of like bringing in more inventory, buying more trucks and more trailers, this could be the thing that ignites that explosion of capacity, and people surging back into the business. I am very optimistic because these big shippers anticipated IEPA being knocked down. And for the folks who are listening, I've written articles for FreightWaves about this. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce success rate is like 80%. So if the U.S. Chamber comes on your side, you're probably going to win. And they, in fact, came on the side of the VOS selections and learning resources. And this is the opinion that we have. It is incredible. And there's a lot of other Supreme Court nuances in this decision. But for the trucking industry right now, if you're a shipper and you have not made plans around this thing, this is why information is so important. Because if you're not paying attention, your competitors absolutely are. And they're going to bring in stuff before you have the opportunity. And then it'll be interesting.
Well, this is the catalyst I think we have been looking for in terms of coastal freight, in terms of imports, because it's been pretty low. Now, in fairness, and it's hard to think about this because it feels like we're in dog years or freight years, which is like 7. Every dog aging is like 7 years to human years. Is the sort of
I have a lot more gray in the last year than I had before.
And it's only been 14 months, Matt. I had to be reminded of this. I was talking to some folks at JB Hunt, and they were telling me this because they're much closer to sort of the front lines because of their significant intermodal business. And I mentioned something about the West Coast. I said, remember that 14 months ago, we were dealing with a strike. 14 months ago, this has not been a long time, but it's like 14 months ago when you had that dude out of Central Casting, the guy, I love this guy, the longshoreman guy.
100%.
I want my piece. I want my piece.
In just a couple of days, the auto plants are going to shut down. The longshoremen put our blood on the line.
The whole economy is going to shut down. That guy, I love that guy. I think he's quite evil, but I love him as like a character, right? And so that video came out, I think, in October or November. It was not
24,
long.
absolutely.
It wasn't long ago. And so a lot of importers were bringing a lot of cargo in. That's why when we look at the year-over-year comps, they've cooled off. Plus, so that was one element. Plus, we had all of the pre-stocking, the pull forward that was caused by just the threat of Donald Trump's tariffs that were coming into the market. So that is a lot of what we're dealing with in terms of comps, in terms of activity year over year in the ports. I think this is a catalyst. And I think being a catalyst will mean that this market is going to get into much tighter conditions. I'm going to win my bet against OTR Capital's president.
That's right.
Who decided, DAT didn't step up. I
don't get involved with your fights anymore. I just try to moderate civil discussions.
Matt, you're friends with all of us.
That's right.
You got to stay.
Switzerland.
You got to stay on the sidelines for this one. I will. So, I challenged Ken, who has a different perspective on the freight market. He thinks a lot of the disruption is weather related, to at least what he's posted. I said, well, let's take a bet on where rates will be. He didn't take my $5,000 bet, and he said he was purely guessing. And so I posted this. OTR Capital's president saw it and said, let's the only
over under on it. Absolutely.
Our charity. He's right. Like DAT could afford a $5,000 bet.
I think it was more Ken. I don't think DAT wanted to participate, but that's an interesting.
I don't think Ken wanted to participate either, for the record. Neither of them. But I try to keep my comments not to the person, but to the business, because it's always, my dispute as I like Ken. I think he's a good guy. He probably doesn't like me right now, but that's fine.
He likes you.
I think and I have respect for Ken. Let's be very clear. I think but a lot of my beef is with DAT. It's Sonar versus DAT. It's like we have a fundamentally different view of business. The individuals are who they are. But OTR's Capital president is like, hey, I want in on this.
Yeah, there you go.
And he is betting, we have a $5,000 bet whether spot rates will go above $3 a mile. I took the over, he took the under. And one of us is going to pay $5,000. Charity wins.
Well, what I get excited about is this is the story of the American supply chain, even going back to the days of pre-deregulation to the time of your father and my father. Is it the winning feast or famine's not new. It's always been the way this industry runs, but it's the ones who can survive during the tough times. You survive long enough, the time will switch, the pendulum will move, and you'll be back in the green. And this could be the thing that drives so much. We thought 25 was going to be a year of recovery. The tariffs and other things kind of slowed it down. But now it's pedal to the metal. Like it's time to go. It's going to be amazing.
The most interesting trucking market that I have ever seen. And I'm saying that, I've been covering this market for many, many years. I've been in it for many years. I don't remember a time when the market was more interesting. I mean, back in the COVID days, the market was incredibly interesting because there's all this stuff happening. That in itself was interesting. We had the ELD mandate. What is that going to mean? It was interesting. We had the great freight recession, and when I first started, I thought that was interesting but quite depressing, and it just kept getting worse and worse. And maybe it's like being in the middle of winter, just like I'm done. Do you remember in COVID where at first it was like you're hypersensitive, and then after a while you're like, can we just stop talking about this?
It's normalization. You just live long enough. It's like
it's the same thing with the great freight recession. It's like I got tired of it. I want change, change the scenery here.
What I find, so I was in Washington, D.C. earlier this week, or whenever this thing airs, I was in the week of February 20th, earlier in the week. And I was with Administrator Derek Bars. And he's at the FMCSA. He's administrator of this agency. We talked about regulations. We talked about the future of our industry. We talked about you. He says you're a good man. So he's a fan. He's a friend. He's excited to connect. Hopefully we get him to F3. But what I think makes this time so interesting in transportation for both you and me is we've been around for a minute. We've seen other things, and we're watching something remarkable happen. We're watching Supreme Court cases. We're watching new levels of cargo theft and enforcement through ICE. We're watching things that have never happened. And it's interesting to be in a historical moment and actually know you are. Actually knowing we are in a moment that no one else would have anticipated. And in 10 years, we'll be like, yeah, we were there and it was crazy, but it was a lot of fun. So that's what I feel, man. I'm really optimistic.
It does feel as if trucking is coming into the public consciousness. It's the major media. It's all these acts. Whether or not you like what Sean Duffy is doing or you hate it, you have to give the administration credit for actually making the market very interesting. And
100%.
Making people who have been around it very important in terms of providing context. And I think we're getting a number of sort of more obscure people that nobody would. I mean, I think Danielle has probably become the hero of the day, if you will. Gord. These are people that were sort of in these weird, Freight X people in my that I'm certainly involved in. I've been interacting with these people for years, but they're somewhat kind of in the obscurity of the depths of the internet, and now are playing roles that you could have never imagined. And it's only because of this sort of perfect storm of activity that's happening around the regulatory environment and the geopolitical environment. You're seeing supply chains be reconstructed, both for national security reasons, economic reasons, policy decisions. And ultimately, I've argued this before, is it doesn't matter whether it was a Democratic or Republican administration. There has been a shift in both administrations to be more protective, more nationalistic, more focused on American industrial supremacy, if you will. The Democrats did it. Biden didn't overturn any of Donald Trump's policies. They came out and attacked him, but they never reversed them. But it makes for good politics, right? And you're seeing this focus, like you said, the FMCSA is getting, at least getting their act together. I think we'd all like to see more faster. We'd like to see them get more resources.
See, that's the thing I want to build off that. So we have been used to having conventional media doing all the conventional media things in conventional times. We are in unconventional times, and it requires unconventional ways of communicating. You were very early in this space, but what we see on the side of both the president as well as Secretary Duffy is that they want to hear from people and they want to find different voices. And so for the folks like us who've been screaming into the oblivion for so long, there's someone listening and they do care. And I think one of the big takeaways for me is that I want to see the FMCSA with a larger budget. I have a plan. I'm going to start trying to figure out how to do this. But to your point, like what Danielle talks about is really a lack of enforcement resources. How do you get all these fraudulent motor carriers? You got 400 investigators at FMCSA looking at hundreds of thousands of motor carriers. They can't do it. It's impossible. And if you want to get a better outcome, you got to invest in it.
There are more registrants a day per day than there are investigators. That's insane.
You can't survive. You can't.
The backlog is so substantial of these major crime syndicates. And it's so frustrating because some of it's just so easy to find, right? And the problem is because for years, the FMCSA did nothing. They did absolutely nothing. And I think that's changing. And that's why trucking is playing a front row center. But I think what's interesting is when we first came along as FreightWaves in 2017, the powers that ran the industry or influenced policy decisions were really all in Washington, D.C. It was OIDA, it was ATA, it was the special interests that really controlled the narrative. OIDA would push against the ATA would push against OIDA, and they would come at these things sort of through the advocacy, lobbyist sort of perspective. And the individual trucker, we're all kind of just participants. The media, the Transport Topics is a division of the American Truckers Association, ATRI, which is a research body, which actually does good work, but it is funded by ATA. And, they can't step outside of the ATA's narrative. In many ways, they reinforce what the ATA has been arguing. But having said that, what we're reaching, and I think that Trump, maybe Obama did this to start with, is he really figured out that if he could sort of capture social media, that he could win the White House. The first he did that, who was Obama ran against? It was Mitt Romney, was it not?
That's right. And McCain
Mitt
before
Romney
that.
was still out of touch with modern media. Obama figured it out. He got a bunch of young people in social media. And then Donald Trump flipped the script because Donald Trump also dove into social media with a very different message, frankly. But they both were it was a very similar playbook with two different constituents, right? And I think what's happened is that this administration in particular has really elevated the common man, the truck driver, the American truck driver as the hero, not the American companies as the hero, which I think has been history, has been the trade associations and the companies themselves that have been driving a lot of policy decisions. And I think this administration has said, wait a second, we are a populist administration, and we're all about the American man or the American woman and the American business leader. And we're going to fight for that. And they have realized that they can drive these social power influencers into to doing a lot of the work for them, of celebrating their victories, that is focused on a very specific type of person. And truck drivers just happen to represent everything that they want. The hero, it's the American worker. It is it fits the demographic that they are as a populist administration that they want to hit. It's American industrialism. It's American manufacturing. And then you get into this sort of immigration story, which is playing out. And I tweeted this. I'm in a little snarky when I tweeted it, but I actually meant what I said, is that you're not going to see liberal white women or liberal women of any race, but certainly you're not going to see liberal women protesting truck drivers getting arrested at truck stops. And somebody pointed out it's because they're not in their neighborhoods. Of course they're not in the neighborhoods. Yeah. But it's because truck drivers are looked down upon the typical people that you see would expect to be protesting. And look, the other sort of argument here is that it is hard to watch as a father that has an enormous amount of empathy towards immigrants, and I do, of seeing fathers and mothers drug out and separated from their children or just be detained. That's hard to watch in these communities. I get the anger of the average person watching this. There is no anger of people being arrested at truck stops, and there will never be any anger in the public population because it's such a forgotten industry. As someone I know calls it, the middle child of America is the truck drivers. It's the forgotten. They're so important to the dynamic of our economy and our supply chains, but they're forgotten. Nobody's thinking about the truck drivers. And that's why it is a very safe place. We've talked about this for the administration to go to the truck stops and arrest immigrants that are undocumented. It is politically safe. And some could even argue, and I would argue this, that is actually the public will be in full support, even people who have a problem with immigration.
That's right.
Enforcement, because they're able to argue safety.
Absolutely.
The security issue is there too, but that's hard, that's lost on a lot of people. They don't realize how pervasive the security problem is. Because it becomes, at that point, is it like, are you accusing these people of being criminals? That is like this whole race question that comes into stuff. We know that clearly there is a high correlation of offshore actors that are infecting our supply chain. We've covered that. But it is a very politically safe place for the administration to attack the truck stops. And that's why what we're saying with these tariffs and the manufacturing renaissance that I've talked about, all that stuff's happening around the demand side, and we're seeing the supply side attacked at the same time.
What I want to build off of that is like why voices like Danielle are so interesting, and Super Trucker and others, is that, to your point earlier, we have let other associations speak on behalf of the supply chain. We look at ATA to tell us we need more drivers. We look at them and say we need to lower the barriers to enter. We look at OIDA for talking about the same thing, keep insurance rates low. And they become the de facto voices of the industry. But then we find out that's not at all what the industry's like. There's something totally different happening. And so people are looking and saying, wait a second, you're telling me one thing here, and then you look and say, that's totally different. With just last week, we had the final rule on non-domiciled CDLs from the FMCSA, and we are going to see in real time. I think there were 17 accidents, 30 fatalities or so in 2025 alone from people who were not legally in our country driving commercial vehicles. And we see people like the ATA pivot. They go, oh, wait a second. What we had been telling you is probably not what's accurate. And they start changing their story.
They never admitted they were wrong, but it was in August. They were in front of Congress in August of this year. You had OIDA and you had the ATA. Chris Spear, you had, I think Louis from OIDA spoke about the driver, this is all driver turnover. That I understand, we understand that is an argument. Most people, it's hard to grasp that, well, you're not paying enough, it's turnover. It gets lost, that message gets lost on people. The ATA has had the advantage of the soundbite of the driver shortage for many, many years. For those that have been in this market, we know that there hasn't been a shortage of truck drivers.
There's never been a shortage of truck drivers.
Too many of them. Well, you can have episodic shortages of capacity.
For local regions, sure, but in general.
But even in the height of COVID, you could have short-term capacity outages, but the market quickly corrects by companies raising wages. That's just how it works. And I think what has happened is that the ATA came and made that case in August that we needed more truck drivers, running out of truck drivers, and they needed to loosen regulations. And I think what happened is they saw the administration flip the other direction. Also, and I know this for a fact, because I've talked to a lot of their senior folks. It's interesting. My daily conversations are either with the C-suite of the largest companies in the space or random truck drivers on X
right.
And I love it, by the way. I love that perspective because it's or brokers or
you bridge the gap.
It's I'm a man of all the people. So that's part of
that's why the show is so successful, really. It really is.
It's yes. But it's interesting because I get both perspectives. I understand how the drivers feel about things, and I understand how a lot of these senior executives. And what I think is interesting is a lot of the large companies that would normally be in lockstep of ATA's positions have completely flipped on this driver shortage issue. And they recognize that we have to tighten up the standards. So I want to tell you one last thing before we go.
Let's do it.
I got a text the other day from someone who I have an enormous amount of respect and trust, is that ICE is taking Sprinter vans around to truck stops and arresting drivers, detaining illegal drivers, undocumented immigrants. And the message was, this was in, I think, Northwest Arkansas was where I was told it was taking place. And in 2 hours, they arrested 30 drivers.
Wow.
The trucks were left at the truck stop. Now imagine this, these are underpowered, they're under load. You now have it's like, what's the old movie where all of a sudden everyone just disappears? It's one of these.
Oh man, I'm trying to remember now.
movies.
The Happening? That's not it, is it?
I know, I can't remember, but it's like
Left
a
Behind?
Stephen King movie where like the world, it's this comet that hits, and then all of a sudden people just evaporate, and all of a sudden society is left to.
Or maybe the Thanos snap.
Yeah. So all of a sudden, like all the equipment, life looks normal. The world is still running on an automated basis, but then the people are gone. And that's sort of what it feels like. Imagine driving to a truck stop and there's 20 trucks sitting there for days, weeks, months at a time that aren't moving because the driver is gone and the cargo's abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
First of all,
That's
shippers
right.
got to take that into account. That's a different story. My question is, if you're a shipper, can you legally move the truck or break the seal?
That's a really good question. So let me be very clear when we begin this answer for everybody. This is not meant to be legal advice. If you think you need a lawyer, you probably do. It's not me unless you pay for it. If you, again, this is not attorney-client relationship. And if you think you need a lawyer, you probably do. So to kind of back into that question, this is not necessarily a new phenomenon. You have plenty of opportunities when truck drivers simply quit or they get fired and they abandon their equipment. That's not new for abandoned equipment. What is new, as you've outlined, is ICE coming and grabbing people. So let's break out scenarios as they come down. We'll leave the most complicated one to the very end. So if you have a company driver who is arrested, you can send another driver or recovery driver. Most of the trucks are all keyed the same. You can get to that thing. You can move on and keep going. Not that one. Leased on owner operator. The company that owns that equipment or has leased that equipment likely has the ability to go and recover that as well. If you get to the really worst case scenario, owner operator, and it's their own truck, it's their own trailer, you have no way to get in front of it. What do you do? Now, I've talked to many lawyers in the past, 24, 48 hours about this topic. And what most of the attorneys have kind of opined to me is that you as a shipper would want to work with local law enforcement to make sure you can get access to this. Chances are that truck and trailer won't sit for super long because a heavy wrecker crew will come and grab it. And then if you don't come and claim your equipment, it's going to be auctioned off. So if you are working proactively with law enforcement, generally speaking, in an emergency situation, and a lost truck driver is probably an emergency, check with local lawyers. You can probably break that seal, transload that freight, and keep moving. But you want to make sure everybody knows what you're doing, because if you just show up without talking to anyone on site or talking to any law enforcement, your agents could be arrested or detained, and you don't want that. But this is not a crazy new phenomenon.
But Matt, let's say it's a fleet with 100 trucks.
Mm-hmm.
And what is the process? Do you contact the trucking company and say, "Where's my freight"? I mean, what is the best?
Yeah, this is exception management at its finest.
Can you break into? So as long as I have law enforcement engaged, like, how do I know that my driver's been detained?
Yeah, so I think what ends up happening is the driver's not going to call you. That's not going to happen.
No, he's in jail.
You're probably going to have to rely on the technology, whether it's telematics in the truck or tracking on the trailer, or maybe even gen logs telling you, or P44 saying this thing isn't moving anymore. You probably should be aware of that. So it's normal exception management. And again, trucks break down every single day. Drivers quit every single day. Drivers get fired every single day. Drivers get arrested for all number of things. And so you are in your normal way of solving these problems. It's just the reason this problem happened is new. It's the driver got arrested by ICE. So this is the thing for any shippers or receivers. You track exceptions. When you see an exception, you have to figure out, where is this thing? Oftentimes you'd have some local person go out and visually see the thing to confirm that it's at the location. I give a great example to you, Craig. When Convoy wound down, they had 4,000 trailers that were all across the United States, and some had tracking, some didn't. And you had to send out people in cars to go try and find them. So it's a complicated question, but I do think that most shippers will know how to solve this. And if it's a 100 truck fleet, you probably know where that truck is. You probably have a key. You could probably send another driver to grab it.
Well, Matt, I think this is something to continue the conversation. Another great episode. We have so much to unpack.
There's never a dull moment. This is why it's so good we don't plan anything, because when you don't plan, you get a Supreme Court decision and you go, oh my goodness, well, we can talk about that today.